John Heilemann is managing editor of Bloomberg Politics. He's also the host and executive producer of a must-watch in this age, The Circus, inside the greatest political show on earth. The program airs on Showtime, which is a division of CBS, and which can be found promptly to binge. But first, John, to today, the critical primary now for both sides.
I think we should focus a little more on the corporate synergy, though. Let's talk about that.
Let's talk about that.
That's key.
Let's marinate in that for a moment. Starting with the GOP.
Yeah.
Donald Trump behind in polls from anywhere between 6 and 10 points.
Yeah.
As he even looks to perhaps lower expectations in the state, what happens if the numbers bear out and a loss comes to pass?
Well, it's funny. He's not really been trying to lower expectations. In fact, he's been in the state campaigning really hard, acting like he really wants to try to somehow stage a big comeback there. Trump's not good at lowering expectations because his whole thing is built on the notion of I'm a winner, I win, win. So he's been raising the stakes, basically saying to his supporters, look, if we win here, it's all over. The reason why Wisconsin's so important is that if Trump were to somehow win, all he'd have to do is basically get about 50% of the remaining delegates, and he'd get to 1,237. He'd have the nomination before the convention, and that would be not over, but he'd still have to perform well. But there's a lot of states down the road where he's pretty strong. If he loses and loses big to Cruz and walks away with, say, no delegates, he's got to get 56, 57% of the remaining delegates, which is hard, even though he's got, as I said, a lot of favorable states down the line. So if he loses tonight, as the polls suggest, if the polls hold true, and he loses by, say, 8, 10 points, Cruz takes all the delegates in Wisconsin, it more or less makes it impossible for anybody to get to 1237. So we're looking at the ultimate journalist fantasy scenario, the thing we always talk about and never comes to pass, but this time looks like it might, which is that contested convention going into Cleveland with no nominee on the first ballot.
Momentum is a topic you guys discuss a lot there on the circus. If Trump loses, does this mean, first of all, that this Stop Trump movement now has momentum?
Yeah, I mean, they'll be emboldened, and there's a lot of people, a lot of billionaires, a lot of establishmentarians, elected officials, people like in Wisconsin, Reince Priebus, the chairman, Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House, Scott Walker, all these people who have kind of tried to figure out a way to stop Trump. Everything they've done in the past has not worked. In Wisconsin, it looks like it's going to work. Partly it's because Trump has contributed to that, right? He's been his own worst enemy. The controversies over the Heidi Cruz tweets, the abortion comments he made, Corey Lewandowski, his campaign manager, getting arrested for battery, for manhandling a woman, female reporter. All of that has created almost like a perfect storm in Wisconsin. So the question is, can the Never Trump forces replicate something like that, including conservative talk radio, which is against him in Wisconsin? Can they replicate that down the line? New York looks like a very strong state for Trump. Hard to imagine he will lose in this state 2 weeks later. So he may get some of that momentum back. And then you've got all these states all over the Mid-Atlantic region. You got Rhode Island, Connecticut, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and then later California, New Jersey. All those states, if John Kasich stays in, who's a guy who could be strong in a lot of those places, you could imagine the vote getting split up 3 ways in very unpredictable ways over the course of the next couple months. I think this Republican race is going to be more than likely, we're going to see competitive contests all the way from here till the end of June. And the most likely scenario, as I said a second ago, is the Never Trump forces, all they're focused on now is get to the convention without Trump having a majority. They are in a pretty good position if they do what they're trying to get done in Wisconsin. They're in a pretty good position to do that. And then the question is, who does the party turn to in Cleveland? How all that internal maneuvering over unbound delegates, over what happens on the second ballot, the third ballot, the fourth ballot. Do they actually rally around Ted Cruz, who might have the second most delegates, or do they look to someone like Kasich, or do they look to someone altogether different? Look for a white knight, look for Mitt Romney, look for Paul Ryan, someone like that. A hugely unpredictable scenario.
I know Priebus has said it's going to be somebody who's running, which, to your point, perhaps John Kasich hanging around hoping for the ultimate journalist fantasy there in Cleveland.
And Kasich's argument is going to be, his whole theory of the case is, he knows he's not going to have either the most or even the second most delegates, but his theory is that once you get to Cleveland, which happens to be in his state of Ohio, he can make the argument that I have a 70% approval rating in this state, maybe the most important battleground state in the general election.
And I can beat Hillary.
And I can beat Hillary Clinton. And the focus then, in his theory and in a lot of people's theory, will be all about electability. Who can we put on now? If it's open, it's up for grabs. All we should focus on now, who can beat Hillary Clinton? And Trump loses, in the polling at least, he loses to Hillary in almost every poll. In almost every poll, Cruz loses to Hillary. So the party, if it's looking just for the most electable of the existing candidates, that's John Kasich.
Meanwhile, for the Democrats, the numbers suggest that this is not a wide open race.
It's not.
However, Bernie Sanders has this momentum that keeps percolating, even as Secretary Clinton perhaps looks to pivot to a general election stance.
Yeah, not perhaps. That's what she wants. She's trying to pivot every day.
What would it mean if the numbers hold? Bernie Sanders wins Wisconsin. What does it mean then, especially for the next couple of weeks leading up to New York?
Right. The Republican story is all about math. The Democratic story is all about momentum, right? And so Hillary Clinton, as you just said, wants to pivot to the general election, wants to get Bernie Sanders out of the race, wants to focus on Donald Trump. If Sanders wins in Wisconsin, he comes into New York with a lot of momentum. And this is a state, it's her home state. She was elected senator here twice, although that was a long time ago. And even the Clinton campaign admits this will be a competitive race. There's a lot of progressives here. Upstate, Bernie Sanders could be a strong candidate. All on Long Island, Bernie Sanders could be a strong candidate. She will obviously be very strong with minority populations here. So a really tense, hard-fought Democratic contested primary. We haven't seen that in this state since 1992. She will be the favorite, but if Sanders could somehow beat her here coming out of a win in Wisconsin, it will cause not a big shift in the delegate math, but it will cause a lot of Democrats to ask, why can't Hillary Clinton win against this guy? Why can't she put Bernie Sanders away in Wisconsin? But more importantly, why can't she put him away in her home state? And those questions of, is she a strong enough candidate? Is she somehow fundamentally flawed? Those will percolate in the Democratic Party as you play out the race. He has enough money to fight. He raised more money than she did for the third straight month this last month in March. He has enough money to fight with her in those mid-Atlantic states, in California, in New Jersey, and he wants to go all the way to the convention. So she is almost certainly going to be the Democratic nominee on the basis of the math because her delegate lead is so large. But is she a strong Democratic nominee or is she a hobbled Democratic nominee? Can she unite the party? What happens if Bernie Sanders emerges, only 100 pledged delegates behind her going into Philadelphia? That creates a specter that a lot of Democrats don't want to look at, which is, man, we could end up with a nominee here who has been significantly weakened over the course of this nomination fight by a 74-year-old socialist from Vermont.
Questions that could certainly be asked by night's end, to be sure. John Heilemann, we appreciate the time.
Josh, happy to be here.